You okay?
You should just wait. So, hello everyone. My video. Okay. Good afternoon, good morning. Hello everyone, and welcome to the launch of the localization of medical manufacturing in Africa. We are joined by esteemed panelists who are going to speak to us about a report on localization of manufacturing of medical products in Africa. We come a long way. And so your moderator for today's session is Dr. Janet Biarohanga from the African Union Development Agency. And I'm pleased to welcome the panelists for this about 2 hours of discussions that we're going to be having. And you're all most welcome to provide your input and your questions, comments, or using the chat. Also, we want to welcome the people who have joined, who assisted with the writing of the report from the Institute for Economic Justice. You're all most welcome, and thank you for a very great report. So without further ado, may I welcome the research team to make their presentations. We will start with, let me just make sure that I have the right order of the presentations. So I will begin by introducing our IEJ's director, Dr. Gilad Isaacs. Dr. Gilad Isaacs will give us the opening remarks. And Dr. Gilad Isaac, maybe you will have to introduce yourself as I get to all of them, your profile. Thank you so much, Dr. Gilad. You have the floor.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Janet. So my name is Gilad Isaacs. I'm the director of the Institute for Economic Justice. Just also to thank our moderator, who everyone's met, Janet, as she noted, is works at the AU Development Agency, NEPAD, where she's a senior program officer in health, with years worth of experience both as a medical doctor and in public policy, and really honored to have her as our moderator here. The IEJ is a economic justice think tank located in South Africa, but which works continentally. And we are really pleased to be able to, with this fantastic group of authors who have worked incredibly hard on this really seminal output. Really pleased to be hosting this. I'll just say that for us, this brings together 3 sets of interests and priorities of the Institute. As we know, access to health and the advancement of one's right to access health is something which the African continent is in deficit on. You know, we saw that most recently with access to the COVID vaccine, where the African CDC estimates at the moment that only about 23% of Africans are vaccinated. But of course, this comes on top of long-standing health needs, whether that's in serious communicable illnesses like HIV and TB, in malaria, but also, as you'll hear, in basic medications, medical equipment, devices, and so on. So this concern for one's rights realization is a key element of the Institute. The second is the importance, which we accord, of leveraging manufacturing as a development path in Africa. The ability of these sectors to create employment, decent work, but also those upstream, downstream linkages, the role in technological upgrading, in improving balance of payments, like making us less import reliant, and so on. And lastly, it brings together a interest in bringing different audiences into conversation with each other. This is a conversation which academics, researchers, health practitioners, health activists, economists, economic policymakers, all need to be engaged in this conversation because it takes place at the intersection of so many issues. And moving forward, we really look forward to continuing to work with this really amazing team of researchers, as well as other partners like the AU and civil society partners, in trying to expand this and ensure that this is a conversation which reaches new audiences. So thanks very much. I'm going to leave the introduction there, because the main event is obviously to hear from those who have knowledge and expertise on these issues. Thanks very much.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Gillard. So Dr. Gillard, I'm sorry I hadn't introduced him fully, but Dr. Gillard Isaac is the director at the IEJ. He's also an economist at the Wits University, where he coordinates the National Minimum Wage Research Initiative, and he's and lectures there. So Gillard has a PhD and a master's in economics from SOS University of London, and a master's in political economy from New York University. He has worked as a consultant for the United Nations International Labour Organization, ILO, and Global Labour University. He has a background in civil society activism, working for the Treatment Action Campaign, and he's also found a society activism activist working for the Treatment Action Campaign, and he's also involved in founding the Social Justice Coalition. He is his research expertise is in financialization, macroeconomics, and labor markets. And I think you're most welcome. You have given us the opening remarks, and now I will introduce, as moderator of the session, I will introduce the speakers, our esteemed speakers who are going to speak about this report on localization of medicines in Africa, manufacturing of medicines in Africa. And I'm going to just read briefly their bios, and then I will call upon the presenters to start speaking. So please bear with me as I go through a little of their bios. So I will start with the bio of Maureen McIntosh. Maureen McIntosh is Emeritus Professor of Economics at the Open University, UK, a development economist specializing in markets in healthcare and medicines. She has a special focus on local production of pharmaceuticals in sub-Saharan Africa. She was principal investigator for a project on innovation for cancer in Africa, and she has written a number of documents there, which centrally are included in investigation of the role of the local manufacturing in improving essential cancer supplies in East Africa. She was also manufacturing in improving essential. She was also lead editor with Geoffrey Banda, who will also shortly introduce, and Paula and Watu of the open access book, Making Medicines in Africa. So you're called upon if you can, find that book and read about it. So that is for Macintosh. Then we have another speaker named Geoffrey Banda. Geoffrey is the Deputy Director of the Inogen Institute and a Senior Lecturer in Global Food Security in Innovation at the University of Edinburgh Science, Technology and Innovation Studies group. He is a multidisciplinary researcher in life sciences innovation, regulation and governance, and African pharmaceutical production. His early training was in biological sciences, molecular genetics and microbiology, and biotechnology, and virology and advanced plant genetic engineering and research in rapid diagnostics of salmonella in food products and so on. He is a former banker whose experience spans commercial lending, credit risk management, relationship management, structured trade finance, structured export finance, and transactional banking financing. He's currently actively involved in 2 research projects. One, tackling infectious diseases for the benefit of Africa, TIBA, and the other is on GCRF, Inclusive Societies, how to link industrial and social innovation for inclusive development, lessons from tackling cancer care in Africa. So he's written a number of articles. He will also be speaking to us. Dr. Andrew Mukwashi. Dr. Andrew Mukwashi will also be part of the team that is speaking to us today. Dr. Andrew Mukwashi is an interdisciplinary researcher with an academic background in regulatory science, business administration, and computer science. Dr. Mukwashi's research interests are on the regulation, standardization, and development of healthcare technologies, the governance of emerging regulatory frameworks, the certification processes of emerging technologies, international development, Internet of Medical Things, cybersecurity, and exploration of artificial intelligence-based medical devices, data governance and policy issues in regulatory sciences, and is currently working as a research fellow in regulation and standardization of connected intelligent medical devices at the University College London. So that is about Dr. Andrew Mukwashi. We have Julius Mugwagwa. He's also going to be among our esteemed speakers on this report. Julius Mugwagwa is a PhD. He's an associate professor in innovation and development at the University College London, Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy, where he currently leads the department's flagship Masters in Public Administration, Masters in Public Administration in degree program. He also serves as the Global Health Thematic Director for UCL's Global Governance Institute, with an undergrad and postgrad qualifications in biological sciences, biotechnology, and regulatory innovation in life sciences. He has worked in veterinary research, pharmaceutical R&D, and quality assurance and harmonization of medicines regulatory systems in Africa. Julius is an accomplished scholar and published author in the areas of global health, health innovation, and health system strengthening, buttressed by his research and teaching interest in the governance and development implications of technologies and innovations. He is currently co-writing a handbook of health and innovation, which will be published next year in 2023. So the last speaker, not 2 last speakers, or they will be intervening at some point. We have Nontombi Pearl, Nontombi Marule, the Director of Innovation and Technology Policy and Strategy at the DTIC here in South Africa. She holds a BSc honors degree in chemistry and applied chemistry, and has a master's in management degree in innovation studies, sorry. She's responsible for the development of policies and strategies, as well as the introduction of new incentives and support instruments for technology development, commercialization, and innovation for the promotion of enterprise competitiveness and industrialization. Her unit focuses on strengthening the conditions for development of high growth technology-based enterprises and promoting collaborative efforts of knowledge generators and innovators. She previously worked at the Department of Science and Technology as a deputy director. Emerging research areas she focuses on. She was responsible for the implementation of the National Nanotechnology Strategy and development of the National Strategy for Photonics. Prior to joining DST, she was part of the radio analytical scientist team at the Nuclear Energy Corporation of South Africa for more than 6 years. She serves currently as an adjudicator for a number of innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship competitions, including a number of them here. The Sub Foundation Social Innovation and Disability Empowerment Awards, just to mention a few. She is also serving as the reviewer for the African Journal of Science, Technology, and Innovation and Development. So she will be also joining us in this meeting to discuss localization of manufacturing of medical products in Africa. The last person that I am introducing is not last, but not the least, is Effofium Kofon. Effofium Kofon, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's a doctoral candidate at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. His research focuses on the political and institutional conditions in which productive activities take place in developing countries and how this informs organizations and response to policies. His ongoing thesis employs the political settlement framework in interrogating the technological trajectory of Nigeria's pharmaceutical industry and the performance of policies. He has a master's in science in international development from the University of Birmingham, UK, and a law degree from the University of Chester, UK. So, as previously mentioned, this is our panel of speakers. Sorry I've taken a lot of time trying to introduce them, but this was quite important for us to know who we are speaking to. So I will now give the floor definitely now to the speakers to start the program. Is it Jeffrey Banda who is going to start, or is it Julius? Please proceed.
Thank you, Janet. I will get us started for the team. Let me see if I can share my screen. Yes, thank you. Can you see the screen?
We can see the screen perfectly, Dr. Julius, please proceed.
Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you, Janet, for the introductions. And thank you, Gillard, for welcoming us and also for setting some of the context, the background and the context for this work, issues around access to health and some of the collateral benefits for the wider economy that come from localization of medical manufacturing. So this is work that the team that has been introduced, the four members that were introduced at the beginning, have been working on for a number of months now. And this project actually builds on work that we have been working on even prior to this particular project. I think Janet mentioned the Making Medicines in Africa book, which actually draws from a lot of work before that. But this particular work really is very timely, very, very important, and links into so many important issues that were raised by the pandemic. And we are grateful to IEJ for having given us the opportunity to work on this. So I'll just start with a bit of background, which are really some headline issues which most of us might be aware of. You know, the level of health technology or health products that actually originate from the continent or from outside, where statistics show that 70% of the requirements are actually imported. You're talking medicines, even some medical devices as well fit into that category. And this situation is untenable, both now and also in the long run. So the COVID-19 pandemic actually just revealed in a very big way some of these realities, and also accelerated the need for urgency, both in terms of how quickly things need to happen, and also urgency around the ownership and the commitment to some of the things that need to be done for these issues to be addressed. And the pandemic also revealed how the current health industry complex, the whole set of actors that are coming together to constitute the space of health and industry, comprising local industrial structures, the health, the value chains, the supply chains, how they are unprepared for rapidly moving health emergencies. Again, this is something that has been around for a long time, and also been around for a while, but really revealed very prominently again by the pandemic is the acknowledgement that has been around, and we have been writing and talking about this as well, the strategic importance of the pharmaceutical sector to local health security and to the wider economies as well. I mean, Gilad mentioned the labor issues and so many other collateral benefits to the wider economy. So this is an agenda that has been on the table, really, that local pharmaceutical manufacturing is important, not just for health security, but for the wider economy. And the pandemic is actually shown that it is not a nice to have, but it's actually something that's really needed. Yet, despite the existence of this commitment, sometimes the investment in the commitment or in some of the policy agendas and the designing and deployment of institutional mechanisms that can sustain the required technological change and the required capabilities for this sector, that has remained poor. And then a number of questions that we've been asking, linking to this study, revolve around whether the COVID-19 experience will herald a shift in the scenario. And it is in this backdrop that this work was commissioned by the IEJ to look at a number of issues, including policy issues, infrastructure, technology, and the broader political economy issues that impact the localization of medical health technology production. So we had 4 interlinked objectives for this work. The first one being to assess the current landscape of medical product manufacturing in Africa. That's always a big ask. It's a moving context, very, very transient, very complex as well. But we did as much as we could. I think really our focus being on not necessarily on completeness of the picture that we would draw, but on the accuracy of that picture, because it's always going to be a moving picture. We also wanted to identify any structural barriers and the opportunities for local manufacturing, and then thinking about a framework for assessing the normative elements of the localization agenda and how different components that are important to that, including availability of drugs and some of the sustainability questions, could be thought about, and suggesting some policy proposals. So our research question, trying to put together everything that we're trying to understand, is put on the slide there. Just really say, how can African countries, or how best can they harness and deploy lessons from the pandemic and from other relevant manufacturing experiences to develop and enhance sustainable capabilities for local manufacturing of health products. So this really just points to the fact that whatever happened in COVID or in response to COVID was actually building on things that have been happening before. There have been structures, there have been policy processes, there have been so many agendas by different actors. So how could those be harnessed in a way that would actually move some of the agendas forward? And from a conceptual point of view, again, just going briefly through issues that we covered to some extent, or to a long extent in the main report, but we just highlight here that our understanding of localizing medical manufacturing derives from a number of standpoints which hinge on notions of geography. So local is a location, is geography, localization as agency. How do we have are we having local actors actually acting and contributing to what they need to do? Agency being very key as well, and then proximity being quite key. So we explore the overlaps between local as a location, then local as localization, and the local agency in terms of speed, and local empowerment, and some of the structural transformations that need to happen at the technological level, but also at the other level as well, taking into consideration some of the transitions that are happening, including epidemiological transitions. And this issue actually elicits a number of conceptual dimensions. And I think this is where the diversity of the team, the research team, where we are coming from very different backgrounds, actually came to the fore to really help us to draw together different concepts that we could actually put together to interrogate the context we were trying to understand, whether it's innovation systems, policy architectures, manufacturing questions, business models, and some of the technological capability questions as well. So our methodology was what we call a multi-sited case study. We had looking at countries as case studies, subsectors, whether it's the medicines, the vaccines, the medical devices, the policy space. So those were different case studies, and we collected data from primary and secondary sources to try and to really understand what was happening in these case studies. Secondary data through desk research, looking at a peer-reviewed literature, gray literature as well, from academic, policy, and practice dimensions. We did some interviews with key informants in industry and then policy, and we analyzed our data around the themes that were emerging. Then in terms of findings, as I go towards handing over to Jeff, who is going to take us through the findings in more detail, I think one of the headline findings that I would really want to confirm, and this has been an argument of ours for a long time, is that the African pharmaceutical sector is not new. We will really highlight in the report some of the history around when manufacturing or industries were actually set up in different countries. So this is really a key point that this study also confirmed. That being said, the study also confirms that African countries were neither self-sufficient nor agile enough to repurpose any existing capabilities to manufacture at the speed and the scale that was required, the products that would meet the challenge. And again, would say this was a global reality. I think most of the countries globally actually just exhibited the same kind of reality, that they were not prepared enough in terms of the scale and the speed to be able to manufacture. But this was the case as well in African countries, as confirmed by this study. And we identified and critically examined some regional case studies, some country case studies, and some product-specific case studies on innovative responses to the pandemic, which link back to the question on how can countries sustain that. And we think there are some opportunities actually for continuation of some of the progress that has been made through the pandemic. So let me hand over to Jeff to just take us through the manufacturing footprint, starting with this one here for medicines and vaccines, and then we'll go into detail for some of the other case studies as well. So over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Julius. Maybe you can just advance your slides so that I don't have to manipulate anything here.
Okay, so I'll stay on this one. You tell me to move when you are ready for the next.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So as Julius said, maybe just delving into a little bit of history. Maureen, Julius, and other colleagues about 10 years ago would go into conferences, and the question that was always asked is, can Africa manufacture medicines? And we got so fed up with this issue of the question of, can Africa manufacture medicines? And we actually went and dug in history and noticed that medical manufacturing in Africa started as far back as the late 19th century. And this work that we're presenting now is just the progressive work of trying to elucidate where does manufacturing occur, and what type of manufacturing occurs across the continent. So if you look on the map on your left on the screen, you'll notice that countries that with the green coloring are the ones that have drug manufacturing capabilities. The ones with the brown color are the ones where we don't have any data. So if we don't have any data, we can't say whether manufacturing occurs there or whether it doesn't. So we just don't have data on that on those countries. And it just goes to show the reality that data is actually scarce on manufacturing capabilities on the continent. And if you look at the countries with the dots, those are 4 countries that manufacture vaccines, and these are Egypt, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. And if you look on the right, that's a breakdown of the number of plants across regions, and we group them in terms of West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, and Southern Africa. And you'll notice that North Africa has these are approximate numbers because we cannot get the exact figures, but it has at least 272 plants or companies. And this is followed in terms of number of countries with West Africa, which is about 178. And quite a huge number of those are actually in Nigeria. And then Southern Africa has about 139 companies. Next slide, Julius. The technologies that are being produced range from tablets to powders, injectables, intravenous fluids to slow release formulations. And depending on the country that you're looking at, the level of technological complexity tends to be low or very high. So if you go to South Africa, for example, and you go to North Africa, the level of technological complexity is pretty high, but in the rest of the other countries, you'll notice that the level of complexity is not that high. And in terms of the therapy lines, you have anti-infectives, the antibiotics, antimalarials and antiprotozoals. You have antiretrovirals, antifungals, and antituberculosis. But what is basically what is problematic is the area of antibiotics, because instead of increased production, you're actually seeing less and less production of antibiotics. And I'm aware that there are efforts to try to bring back more local production of antibiotics. Antiretrovirals, I think these were triggered by the challenge of HIV/AIDS that the continent faced. And in terms of other medications, there are antihistamines, gastrointestinal medicines, colds and flu preparations, all the way to radiology and musculoskeletal interventions. The challenge, though, on the continent is it is highly dependent on importing the active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are the APIs and the excipients. Local API production on the country is one of the really problematic areas. South Africa does some API production, and this is mainly Aspen, which does paracetamol, codeine, and a cancer drug API production. And if there is any effort that needs to be made for Africa to become, not to become self-sufficient, but to have a level of some level or modicum of self-sufficiency, this, I think, is the area that a lot of emphasis should be placed on, the production of the local production of APIs. Next slide. Now, zooming in on the countries that produce vaccines, and as you can see from the years of establishment, Egypt established Vaxera as far back as 1897, and it produces tetanus toxoid vaccine, diphtheria and tetanus toxoid vaccine for pediatric and adult use. It produces meningococcal vaccine as well as the cholera and typhoid vaccine. And when we did this slide, they were planning to produce Sinovac vaccines, which I think they're already doing. And there's a new vaccine facility outside Cairo, which we have a capacity of about 1 billion doses per annum. Senegal has the Institut Pasteur de Dakar, and this also has its, excuse me, this also has its genesis dates back to about 1896, and it's one of the few facilities that manufacture yellow fever, and they've been doing this since 1930s. And as I said earlier, it's one of the 4 approved manufacturers of yellow fever vaccine in the world. So sometimes we tend to bash ourselves, but here is a good story that here is an African enterprise that is one of the 4 producers of yellow fever vaccine in the world. In South Africa, you have Aspen, which has gone through different permutations and combinations since 1850 up to now, and went public in 1997. This is one of the biggest African-based multinational corporates. And what is fascinating is, if you look at their story, is quite a huge chunk of their revenues come from API production, but the API production does not occur in Africa. It comes from production in Europe for a firm that they acquired. And then you have BioVac, which is a public-private partnership in South Africa. This is one of the innovative companies that I know that has actually been involved in developing vaccines that they've out-licensed to Japan. So they manufacture BCG for TB, and this is fill and finish activities. They do measles vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, tetanus toxoid vaccine, and they have. But when we were doing this, they had an agreement to produce the Pfizer COVID vaccine, basically the fill and finish. And the last one is in Tunisia, is Institut Pasteur de Tunis, which was commissioned in 1893. They also produced BCG, and what was under development was the rabies vaccine for human and veterinary use. Next slide, Julius. So the next area that we covered, we've spoken about drugs, we've spoken about vaccines, and my colleague Andrew is the expert on medical devices. This again, just as APIs, is also the other area that really needs a lot of science, technology, and innovation, enterprise development. Non-Tombio here. This is the area where there is so much scope for local production, and unfortunately, is one of the most understudied, but again, there's not much local production of medicines that occurs because of medical devices that occurs because there's a high reliance on imports. And in most countries, there's over 90% of the medical devices are imported. And even when you consider South Africa, a country with a well-developed medical device sector in terms of companies registered to sell medical devices, only a very small proportion of the manufacturing firms are local. And so the sector faces technological, market, and regulatory hurdles. And maybe whilst I'm here, I could specifically talk about the regulatory hurdles that the medical devices sector needs. So the medical devices sector needs both the local medical regulatory agency, but they operate based on standards. And so they need, if they want to export also, they need what is called a CE mark. And most of these CE marks given, or the certification is actually given or provided by notified bodies. And these notified bodies are the standards bodies that you have in Europe. The standards bodies that we have in our African countries are not notified bodies. So these companies have to go to the local regulator to come and inspect them, but when they want a CE mark, they actually have to go and get them from Europe. And so this actually increases their regulatory costs. And by increasing these regulatory costs, they become uncompetitive. So in terms of the institutional and infrastructural support system that is required, this is one sector, Non-Tombi, I'm nudging you, that it really, really needs a lot of help. So as I said earlier, currently, these companies depend on Europe for certification and getting and regulatory compliance. Next slide, Julius. So in terms of the business models that we found, if you look on the left-hand side, we have 4 types of ownership structures, so to speak. So the first type are family-owned businesses. The second is small to medium privately owned. The third are large corporates, and the fourth one are multinational corporates. And I think here we need to load the the contribution that these family-owned and small to medium private-owned companies have contributed to African health systems. The African health systems have depended on these family-owned and small to medium private-owned companies for the production of the generics that meet most of of Africa's health needs. Because for some of the big companies, there isn't that much scale, and they feel that they don't need to produce these molecules. But these molecules are produced by these family-owned and small to medium private companies. And in terms of technological complexity, it's you have a much higher technological complexity at the base when you're looking at the multinationals. But one thing that is happening, at least in South Africa, is as some of the multinationals are leaving, they're selling off their companies to the locals. And so that is one of the ways that this technological complexity is being acquired on the continent. Next slide, Julius. So we come to regulation and regulatory capabilities. Regulation is important in order to assure the safety and the efficacy of technologies that are used in the sector. And I think it's self-evident when you looked at the number of local producers that we have a lot of small molecule or chemical drugs producers, only 4 vaccine producers, and we didn't quantify the number of companies that we have in terms of medical devices. So it stands to reason that you have actually more regulatory capabilities in the drugs and a few regulatory capabilities in vaccines and not that much in medical devices. So a WHO study established that there are 54 national medicines regulatory authorities across the continent, although only 7% of these have the capacity to perform the core functions that are expected of these agencies. And I'm sure when we have the discussion, Janet will talk more about the Africa Medicines Agency and the kind of momentum that this trust will bring to the continent. I had mentioned earlier that vaccine regulatory capabilities exist in the 4 countries that have historically manufactured vaccines. So the capabilities for vaccines exist, and in terms of radical or incremental innovation, we would argue that these countries with regulatory capabilities in vaccines will be the ones that will find it easier to extend their regulatory capabilities to other biologicals such as monoclonal antibodies and cell therapies and everything else. But for the countries that have capabilities in drug regulation, they may find it really difficult to transition into regulatory capabilities in biologics. However, there is an initiative that is occurring on the continent that we think is really, really important, and this is Zazibona. And Zazibona is composed of Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia. And I'm told recently South Africa joined, where you pair up an experienced regulator with an up-emerging regulator, and they go and do core inspections. And by so doing, you're actually helping upgrade the regulatory capabilities. So if we come to the barriers to localization of medical manufacturing, the first one is lack of industrial protection to support local production. I know 5-10 years ago, industry policy was anathema, but with the realities that have hit us in recently, it has become apparent that industry policy, and whichever name you give it, industry strategy, industry policy, is really important. And when you have a nascent industry, it's important to nurture it until such a time that you can open up to international competition when it is ranked up the capabilities that it needs. The second challenge that we find to localization of medical manufacturing is policy incoherence. So finance policy, taxes and revenue collections sometimes go contra to industrial policies. And we think that there needs to be coherence and talking between finance policy, industry policy, and also health policy, because health policy is really important, as the fifth point there indicates. Health policy is really important for procurement, because you can use active procurement decisions as active industry policy to support, or as a pull factor for supporting local industry development. And the last point is there is general weaknesses in generating decent work in and through the sector. The next slide, Julius. So this looks like a complicated diagram, but I think I'll start from the right, so that we need to rethink the role of the public health system, because the public health system through active procurement can actually save as a demand pool for innovation. And if the public health system does that, then you go to the left, you actually build these broad industrial capabilities. And COVID actually showed us that those countries that were quick off the block were those that not only manufactured pharmaceuticals, but that also had these local backward linkages and forward linkages in terms of other industrial capabilities. So once you build these broad capabilities, and you purposively develop linkages and collaborations between and amongst different sectors, and then you have procured and reassured markets, you can actually then pump prime this innovation pipeline and ensure that you get localization occurring. But this is not an easy thing to do, because we have pockets of excellence all over the show. So we think that one of the ways that this can be done is develop centers of excellence. And I think the Africa CDC is actually doing this where they are setting up centers of excellence, especially for vaccine production. And at the base of the foundational aspects of building these capabilities are standards and regulations as tools for governance, and policies and the policy coherence that we spoke about. And we're talking about policy as action. And instrumental to this are industry associations, because there needs to be contestations that go on, and industry needs to actually help build the momentum that you require. So this is what we found. And in terms of the policy, the conclusions and policy recommendations, our study has confirmed that African pharmaceutical manufacturing is not new. It has been happening over the continent for over 100 years. And that, like elsewhere, there were deep fragilities that were revealed by the pandemic. And it's not Africa that faced challenges. We had a webinar in 2021, and our Indian colleagues were actually telling us that India depends, and as much as 85% of the APIs are imported from China. And this has had forced them to rethink and reorganize the industrial capabilities so that they're able to produce more APIs as they used to do. So yes, there were deep fragilities globally, but what differed is how countries responded through harnessing or repurposing available local capabilities. And in Africa, we know Africa is not a country, it's composed of a number of different countries with different geopolitical, economic, socioeconomic, and other issues. But we think that these countries need a culture and policy that imbues a can-do attitude. And this was seen in countries that were shaken into action during COVID in terms of the production of devices and diagnostics and ventilators for COVID. However, in terms of political economy, there are various historical and current impediments that have to do with political institutions, economic institutions, science, technology, and innovation strategies that need to be untangled if we are to look at sustainable localization of manufacturing of medical technologies. COVID was a wake-up call. I think the question that's really important is the governments and agencies that were involved in the COVID experience. Are they going to stay awoke or awake, whichever way you want to say it? And so, in terms of the specific conclusions and recommendations, and Cheryl, I know I have 1 minute to go. I'll go through this fast. So the first is there is urgent action which is needed to build commensurate industrial capabilities. And the state is the only actor with the political legitimacy, control of resources, the ability to exercise immediate urgency and agency through public policy to roll out these political technical projects. And maybe I'll stop here and explain the reason why we call these political technical projects. So if you look at the political economy of pharmaceutical manufacture on the continent, they were plugged into global value chains that have trade imbued in it and global value chains imbued in it. And so the power dynamics in terms of governance of global value chains and the power dynamics in terms of trade can, in a way, force a certain path dependencies. So it is important that when countries go into local manufacture, that they realize that there will be pushback from incumbents, because incumbents do not like the carpet to be pulled from under their feet, so to speak. So there needs to be that political awareness that there will be trade pushback. And some of these can actually come through industry associations, through international relations guises or masks. So it's important that there is a realization that these are political technical projects, and they need to be, because Africa was made aware that it is on its own and they couldn't get vaccines when COVID occurred. And the second recommendation is the greatest shortcoming during COVID was the inability to access APIs and excipients. So the continent urgently needs to build API manufacturing. And we are hoping that projects like Kehlapela in South Africa will rise and actually spearhead this local production of APIs. The third recommendation is SMEs have served African countries for more than a century. However, the current business models that they have are not adequate for the scale of intervention that is required during a pandemic, and also to build local health security. Next slide, Julius. So if you think back to the discussion on the business models, we showed that the complexities. Julius, I think your slide has gone blank.
Sorry, Jeff, let me try to figure out what has happened here.
Okay, if it's a problem, I could share mine.
Yeah, let me just bring it back. Yeah,
Okay,
can you see it now?
All right, so
the next one, this one here.
This one, yeah. So the fourth recommendation is that there is a need to actively transition to newer technologies, and this is where the can-do attitude comes from. And how can this be done? It can be done through joint ventures, licensing in new technologies, and also just using the triple helix approach, where universities work with industry and with government to actually build these capabilities that are required to transition to new technologies. And medical devices are a fledgling industry, but it requires agent support. And this includes not only the availability of finance, but also building finance capability, the standards bodies becoming notified bodies so that they can actually give certification to local products, and other institutional support that the sector requires. The sixth recommendation is the biologics sector has huge potential in terms of vaccines and other products such as monoclonal antibodies. One of the challenges that we noticed in the interviews that we did for this project and in other projects that we're doing is that a lot of the local companies tend to focus on the local industry. And this ambition to conquer the world doesn't seem to be there. And we think that this is a sector which can actually have that dual utility. It will support the local market, but it can actually feed into international markets. And by so doing, you imbue the element of international competitiveness. I think the last slide, Julius.
Yes.
Next slide, Julius.
Yeah, it's the last one now.
Okay. Oh, so that's the last one. So we're finished. Yeah,
no, this one, you haven't spoken on these points here.
Yeah, I've spoken about those points. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm looking at two different schemes. My apologies.
Yeah. Okay.
So development of medical health technologies is a long-term, is long-term in nature, and people who talk about industry development, well, then used to say it takes up to 25 years to establish an industry. And so it is important that when we look at these political projects, that we're not looking at a 1 year or 5 year time horizon. We must look at long-term horizons, and this requires patient capital. And we go back to the state being the agent that has the political legitimacy and reach and agency to be able to do this. And the state can actually use innovative procurement. So science, and the next point is science, technology, and innovation systems are critical components of localization of medical health technologies. And so the science granting councils have an important role to play here in terms of shaping the direction of research and technological capabilities building. And lastly, localization challenge is not only technical, but it encompasses local and global power dynamics, as I said earlier, and these span political, social, technical, and economic aspects, and hence the key role of the state in the pharma sector. And that should be the last one. Thank you very much. In terms of acknowledgement, we would want to thank IEJ, and specifically Gillard and Sherry Lynn, in helping us shape and reshape the report. We are also grateful to our study respondents who spoke to us, and the report reviewers, some of whom are here. We thank you for your assistance, and we also want to thank our universities, the Open University, University College London, and my university, the University of Edinburgh. Thank you. Over to you, Madam Biorahanga.
Thank you so much, George and team, Julius. The team of researchers, thank you very much for a very good presentation there. You did not only do detailed research, but in-depth research, but you also have recommended very critical areas where the continent needs to put the focus on. We really do appreciate that. From a continental perspective, you know, you and I, especially this team, have been discussing a lot about how can we really move away from talking and begin to walk the talk. So the recommendations that you have put forward, we really appreciate those, and we really do hope that working together with the relevant stakeholders, we will be able to move the needle in the right direction, talking and walking the talk as well. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to some respondents to this presentation. I have two that I have with me here on that I already introduced earlier. Ms. Marule. Ms. Marule, you will be responding in a few minutes, and then Mr. Kofon. Please, in that order, take the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. I'd like first to thank IEJ for the opportunity and just indicate that it was quite interesting and fascinating to look at the work that the team has done, which I feel like it's been done very well, and commend the IEJ again for commissioning the study. Because I think we are in the era of learning and every day improving what we do through these types of activities. Now, in terms of responding, you know, I had a whole list of aspects that I wanted to put up for, but as the team was presenting, I started, you know, having different thoughts in terms of how I want to present my response. But so pardon me if I sound non-logical, because what I wanted to start with was the last point that Geoffrey was making in terms of the political technical projects. You know, it took me back to the time of COVID, when every almost 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we would look forward to our president addressing the nation. You know, we would have aspects of the president is talking to their fellow South Africans, and we even termed it a family meeting. You know, when we were in our workspace, and say today is a family meeting. And why I'm remembering that time is because at that time COVID has shown us it was a necessary pressure for us to focus on one thing. I mean, the country was united around what is it that we do tomorrow. And it was immediate and it needed to be done now, you know. So I mean, even when lockdown restrictions were put in place, it was like with effect from the day after tomorrow, everything stops. Nobody goes to shops, nobody goes to offices, and we stop like that. So the first point is that these pressures are necessary for us to change the way of thinking, and we know that it has done that for us. So that's the first thing. But also, unfortunately, if we make them a political projects, unfortunately, the country's president is inundated with a number of priorities in the country. So that thinking is very well accepted, but also just to remember that there might be a lot of other competing priorities as well, which on a day-to-day basis then we are engaged with. That's the first one. But then also to just say, I find that the outcomes of the study, as much as they focused on the medical, medical pharma and medical devices, they're quite transferable to other sectors of the economy, right? For instance, issues of regulatory aspects that the government needs to support around capability and capacity. So we have found that in other sectors, in manufacturing, in agro-processing, in how you really change the export deficit, those are the things that are necessary. So it's just for us as policy developers, an emphasis of how important that is. Also, secondly, it's the industry protection. Also, I find that is very, it's something that is needed. You'll see the stances of the GTIC, for instance, around localization aspects and how we want to develop our own industries using localization and to some extent procurement projects. So that is quite a commendable and a good find, I think, and again, an emphasis for that. Policy incoherence also, again, is something that we have seen. But when it comes now to business models, I find that where business models are concerned, there are two major aspects that talk to funding or financing of these businesses, but also the technology transfer regimens that we need to adhere to as different countries, and especially in South Africa. And there needs to be a lot more emphasis and coherent thinking about how do we do that, because it's all and well to be developing technologies within the science, technology and innovation fraternity, but how then do you transfer that and make sure that you create business models that are viable, and whilst you are looking at that, you then start looking at industrial capability for this particular manufacturing, and how also I find in South Africa, how do we go back to using our grassroots innovation, our indigenous knowledge systems, and how we make them legitimate? How do we legitimize those such that this sector can thrive? Because I find that yes, in the global fraternity, yes, there are APIs, there are quite standards, but how do we then build our own capability and legitimize it such that then when you go global, then you are able to thrive? And then lastly, Janet, the one thing that I wanted to say, and which I think the team identified very well, is how as African countries we collaborate. I mean, with the African free trade zone now, it's not only about trade, but it's about collaborative efforts, even at knowledge and technology development. How do we do that? How do we then synergize our efforts such that then we don't repeat or sort of reinvent the wheel where capabilities have been built? So I think that's also for me one of the key lessons that this study has uncovered, to say how then even in Africa, because at first, when I was reading the objective of the study, and it said manufacturing capabilities in Africa. I thought this is such a wide scope. But at the same time, the use of case studies was such that then you can use a few countries as examples, but then at the same time, just make sure that the information or the knowledge can be translated. But all in all, I'd like to commend the team for the work that they've done. It is broad, and I understood to some extent how difficult it was for them to even get information in specific countries. But I mean, the collation is such that this is a start, and how then do we, move forward and take the lessons and the recommendations made by the study and use them as individual countries to then grow our economies. Thank you. I'll end it there.
Thank you so much for that clear response, Maruli. So we will give the floor now to Mr. Kofon also to respond. And just may I remind participants that are listening to us, kindly, if you can also share your comments and put your questions down in the chat box, and we'll be able towards the end, after Kofon has made his response, also respond to your questions. Over to you, Mr. Kofon.
Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Right.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, thanks, Janet. Thank you for IEJ for putting this together, and to Geoffrey, Maureen, Julius, and Andrew for your sustained effort at emphasizing and highlighting local manufacturing in Africa. And as a research student, I like to say that I stand on the shoulders of giants in that respect. And this is a very timely research, especially in the last few years with COVID-19. And I remember reading a manufacturer in Nigeria said something very sinister. He said, "Thank God for COVID, because now there's government interest in COVID." And also reading the Vanden Ko's paper on the 2021 webinar. And someone said that this is a wake-up call for Africa. But the problem I find with that is that Africa hasn't slept. We've had malaria, we've had TB, we've had HIV, we've had Ebola, we've had children dying from pneumonia, we've had all these things. So we haven't slept. And at the same time, we say there's a renewed political interest in pharmaceutical manufacturing. But at least in the last decade, going back to say 2005, the African Union have always had several declarations. Every year there's been a declaration on political commitment and interest in pharmaceutical manufacturing, including the 2012 business plan for pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa, but nothing has come out of it. Now the question is, why hasn't anything come out of it? Why is Africa still at the bottom of the pile? And I'm speaking on the political economy now. I'm focusing on it. Is the pharmaceutical industry in Africa, in some respects, is a benefit system, and Geoffrey alluded to this when he said there will always be pushback from incumbents, right? And this is a complexity of the pharmaceutical industry, which I say is a benefit system. Is there are people benefiting from it? The local manufacturers are benefiting from it, because most of them also import, and importers are benefiting from it because they just import. So if you look at from a industrial policy perspective, right? The two purposes of industrial policy as regards pharmaceutical industry. The first one is to go from manufacturing simple formulations to complex formulations, and the second one is to reduce the tide of importation. And in this respect, any policy that comes out or any policy designed to affect this has distributive implications. It would create winners and losers for manufacturers, for importers. Because, for instance, you say, look, you have to go from manufacturing paracetamol to amoxicillin. Then manufacturers who are manufacturing amoxicillin will benefit from it. But there'll be pushback from importers, who in most instances are very much connected to the political networks in the country. And again, you say, oh yeah, you're manufacturing amoxicillin, it has to be GMP or from a GMP certified plant. Manufacturers would kick against this because at the end of the day, it would not be competitive for them to invest in this. And again, if you look at it from a health perspective, like Geoffrey said, innovative procurement. Now, procurement in some ways, theoretically, can also increase demand and lead to manufacturing. But what do you procure if there's nothing there? So essentially, you're not procuring, you're importing. And then that creates adverse incentives. So if everyone's making money from importation, because I need to, at the end of the day, satisfy, meet demand, procure medicines for people, so we end up importing. So that benefit system from an industrial policy perspective and a health perspective creates a problem. And again, if we're talking about incentives, so we say there should be incentives for local manufacturers in terms of subsidies, tax breaks. But it's one thing to provide incentives. It's another thing to tell them what you need them to produce. Right, so you have a situation in Nigeria, for instance, where my research focuses on. In 2020, just after COVID, the Central Bank of Nigeria gave out low-cost intervention funds to pharmaceutical manufacturers, right? And this is a big thing. Pharmaceutical manufacturers are very happy. But at the same time, it didn't say to them what you need to manufacture. So you find a situation where local manufacturers would take the money, and if they were manufacturing, say, oral suspension for amoxicillin, they'd carry on manufacturing that. So there's no progression. There's no movement from of technological advancement from simple formulations to complex formulations. But again, that itself is a problem, because if you, for one, I give you money to manufacture a certain thing, I also have to possess the capabilities to say to you, this is what you have to manufacture. You know, it's all good giving you incentives, but what happens if you don't? Do I have the capabilities to stop you? So from a political economy perspective, I think this is one aspect that we should focus on, and that is, you should, as a policymaker, you should understand your capabilities, your governance capabilities, to be able to compel manufacturers to manufacture certain things. And you should also understand the capabilities of manufacturers themselves to resist your policies, because essentially, if the policy is not beneficial to pharmaceutical manufacturers in terms of being economically viable to them, it wouldn't work, right? Regardless of how much incentives you give, the incentives would effectively sustain the system, which would, you know, keep it trapped in a low productive, simple formulations, which is essentially where we find ourselves in Africa today. So I think one aspect of it, and you know, as Geoffrey said, you mentioned the emphasis on local manufacturing of APIs, for instance, and this is where policies really matter, and the institutional capabilities to push these policies and sustain them. Is the pharmaceutical company in Nigeria, for instance, EMSA, which is one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in Nigeria. EMSA recently received funding from the European Investment Bank to manufacture APIs for ACTs. Right. But it's good receiving the funding, which is big. But the issue is, if it succeeds in manufacturing the APIs, where's the market for it? Can the state compel and incentivize local manufacturers in Nigeria to buy their ACTs, their raw materials from EMSA? So until that happens, it wouldn't make any sense. So EMSA would end up investing all this money, but the state also has to have the capabilities to stop other local manufacturers from buying the APIs from India or from China, and say you have to buy it from EMSA. So these are things which I think we should focus on, the political capabilities, the political economy aspect of it, and the institutional capabilities of the state to incentivize and at the same time compel manufacturers to manufacture certain things, and also state to them, this is what you need to manufacture. If not, I'll take away the funding. Can that happen? You know, it's something we'll have to wait and see. But thank you for this opportunity. And this is something that if we carry on, it would go places. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Kofon. You raised very important issues to focus on as we move forward in walking the talk. Definitely the question of incentives and how they're packaged and how they're timed, that needs to be clearly understood, and we need to, as we encourage governments to work with the private sector in addressing the challenges that were enlisted, we need to be careful and cautious, but at the same time, we need to not just, say out the problems, articulate the problems very well, articulate the potential solutions very well, and then do nothing. So we are on a path that clearly we are aware of the challenges, and different countries have already shown the interest in developing their local industry. We're proposing solutions. The recommendations have been made clear. Now, what we just need to do is work towards a certain direction which allows us to make progress. And you do rightly say that there's been a lot of talk, there have been a lot of commitments here and there politically, but we just need to, begin to shape in a way, because this is a very complex industry, and the political, the technical, and all of these issues working together. We can only move forward if we design our incentives in a very careful and progressive manner. So I'm going to ask to open up the floor for Q&A. We don't have a lot of time, I'm sorry, but in the Q&A, if you have a question, please do feel free to ask your questions. And also remember, we will be sharing the report and the presentations, so for those who need to know more about this research. So thank you so much, the researchers and the respondents. Now we open the floor to questions. In case you don't have questions, people coming up to speak on the mic, I will just read the questions that I have so far received, so that you can already think of responding to them as the team. So the first question is regarding, it's from Stephanie Mola. How do you stand to the recent news? BioNTech Pfizer has developed a vaccine factory made from shipping containers that it plans to ship to Africa as assembly kits to ease what the World Health Organization has described as huge disparities in global COVID-19 vaccine access. Question number 2 is from Danielle Cerebro. Please may you share the name or link to a website of the regulatory mentoring program mentioned by Dr. Banda? And then announcement, okay. Then there was a question regarding, from Zakele Madela, regarding the presentations and the contact details of the main presenters. I think that we will share. And she talks about being busy with a privately owned industrial park that has a good opportunity for investors who may want to propose a medical manufacturing industrial plant or even a medical storage center. So this one would like to just know the opportunities on the continent, I think, about manufacturing industrial plants or developing these medical storage centers. Those are the few questions I managed to register here. In case there are any other questions, please continue to put them through. For now, I'll let the researcher team respond to those few questions. Over to you. In any direction you would like to take it, it's up to you, research team. Over to you.
Yeah, I could jump in quickly. Yeah, the question by Stephanie, a very interesting one. I haven't seen the news she's referring to about the manufacturing, the systems that are being championed by Pfizer. But I think it speaks to one of those realities around how there's been a lot of work around the different manufacturing systems, moving away from the cathedral, the blockbuster manufacturing, to some kind of modular ways of manufacturing. And I think the question that really comes is about the standards of those facilities and how they actually don't compromise on the kind of products that are coming out of that. So maybe there is an issue to be explored on that. Then
Jeff has quite a bit of knowledge on that very point, Julius. Maybe let him comment on that.
Yeah. So you want to come in right now, Jeff?
Yeah, that's okay. And I have a tendency to shoot from the hip, so I won't hold back on this one. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the situation where the company was talking about bringing in these factories and the regulation will be done by IMA. And I have really strong objections to stuff like that. One of the challenges that a lot of African companies have is this regulatory layering. They have to get authorization from the national regulator, then they get regulation from another supranational organization and everything else. And my argument, as I said, I'm shooting from the hip. If I go to the USA, FDA is a local regulatory agency. If I come to Europe, EMA is a local regulatory agency. And we should stop this issue of making African countries subservient to all these other regulatory agencies. Let's build regulatory capabilities in Africa so that these regulatory capabilities have the technical expertise to be able to do this. So if they're bringing in these things, they must be subject to the regulatory agencies in Africa. I think there's an element of national sovereignty that should be observed here. That's why I meant I'll shoot from the hip. By the way, I just shut up here.
Julius, can I add something to that? Because there's quite an important debate around this, I think, which is about IP. The ownership of the technology. I mean, this proposal from BioNTech, as I understand it, and other people know this story much better than me, I'm sure, is in the context of the debate about the re-engineering of the Moderna vaccine in South Africa and the ownership of IP and the transfer of IP on the new mRNA technology. So I think there've been questions raised about whether a transfer of a modular system retaining the IP within, for example, BioNTech, versus attempting really to transfer the mRNA technology and control of it to African contexts, and how that sits within the debate about where the mRNA technology IP is held and understood and how important that is. I mean, there's a wider context to that debate around the transfer of the BioNTech modular technology, which retains, of course, the IP within the European-based and American-based multinational. So I think that debate's important, I think. And it's important, Jeff knows much more about the underlying technology than me, he's the expert, but in the term political economy terms, I think the debate around that transfer is strongly embedded in a broader debate about the transfer of the mRNA technology for vaccines and for its further use into African scientific capabilities.
Yeah, and maybe if I could jump in there, Maureen, one of the challenges, the complexities around the mRNA technology is it can be a platform technology. And there is talk that it has utility in oncology. And so that utility in oncology is the reason why some actors would want to hold back on IP, because they know that the holy grail of the pharmaceutical industry is if you break into oncology. So that speaks to the reason why maybe they'd want to do things in a certain way. But the issue is an IP issue should not create other institutional infrastructures that further making up the motors. But I think what's important, and I think I think in South Africa there was reverse engineering, right? If I'm not mistaken, using the open innovation approach. I think there was, is it Afrigen, or I've forgotten the name of the company. There was some reverse engineering. So, but I think part of it is this wide. There's
a big reverse engineering effort, yeah, which has been funded and supported in part through the WHO, yeah, to transfer to basically re-engineer the Moderna vaccine based in South Africa, and it's a really important tech transfer issue.
Yeah.
And in order to, the political economy, you're absolutely right, the political economy framework for that, this is potentially hugely profitable, but it involves enormous amounts of scientific expertise. And that reverse engineering issue, it was a very interesting international collaboration, which needs not to be sabotaged by the broader.
Exactly. And it goes back to the power dynamics that we're talking about of trade, the global value chains, and who benefits from that. And I think there's a space for discussing this, but I shall shut up and let the others speak.
Thank you very much. I see the discussion is getting more exciting towards the end as we have fewer minutes, but to be honest, the issue of technology transfer, we need to look at it deeply. What part of the technology, what range of things are being transferred here, and if we take it for granted that there is a technology transfer here, and the recipient and their capacity to absorb the technology, and what do we consider as a full realization of the tech transfer, we need to really renegotiate that understanding. And as we have made progress in harmonizing the way we look at medicine's regulatory affairs, we also now need to look at how the technology is also regulated, because as much as we have made progress, and African Medicines Agency is, of course, an institution that is going to take on a lot of the other complementary work to support our national regulatory authorities here in Africa, it's important that we also look at that other part, the technology part, the health technologies and things like that, and medical devices, which really is a deeper area of standards which are outside some of the regulatory conversations that are going on from the medicines perspective. So I'm not going to continue on this conversation for now. Please respond to the other question that had been asked, and then I have yet another question that I will ask the researchers that are being asked by the audience. And I have to remind you, we have 2 more minutes, so please answer the questions very briefly, research team. Over to you.
I think the other question was, I'm not sure whether it was Daniela who had asked for a link to the document on Zazibona. So I gave a link to, I think, a separate document, but other medical MRAs do have stuff on that. But if Daniela wants more information, she can always email me and we can sort that out. Thanks.
Okay, so she has an additional question here talking about if you were in a room of high-level Ministry of Finance and health officials from a low or middle-income country, what would you recommend as the top 3 issues for them to discuss to support local manufacturing? For example, could it be about import substitution? Would there be any public financial management bottlenecks that would need to be addressed? So that's a question. The other question is, are there ongoing efforts or existing structures to harmonize regulation across Africa? I think we do have that. Country-specific regulation could limit product supply security. So that's another question. I don't know who it was from, but that's worth responding to. So those are the 2, and I'm sorry, we will receive the answers from that and then bring this to a close.
Does anyone in the team want to go, or I can shoot?
Please shoot. Please
go
shoot.
on, Jeff.
So Daniel, you asked a very interesting question, and it is important how we frame the problem. And the way that I would cheekily frame the problem is, number 1, you need to build local health security. And to build local health security, you need to develop industrial capabilities that ensure this local health security. And the third thing that I would want to talk about is you now need to give them the finance, the space, and the support that you need to actually build these industrial capabilities and ensure the local health security. But that's my cheeky response. I'll let Maureen and Andrew and Julius.
Yeah, for me, it was going to be
So-
a quick one, which links directly into what you're saying, Jeff. And I think it connects back to what FA mentioned as well about incentives and where they would go. I think that they cannot really go anywhere outside the kind of industry base or the techno-institutional complex that exists. So I think ministers of finance would really need to build the base and the different capabilities that are required. And that includes creating the spaces for the co-location of the academic or the research functions, the government and the industry. So that base needs to be there. And then the incentives can actually work within those kind of systems that are able to deal with all the different issues that are required for this. But it's a key question, definitely.
For me, I think adding to what Julius have just said is that I think there is need to build comprehensive regulatory frameworks. For example, we see 2017 and 2018 being a landmark year in which medical technology devices and their products, becoming subject to statutory regulation for the first time in South Africa. So that was quite good, but the transition of these regulatory frameworks does not mark the end of comprehensive regulatory frameworks, but there is need to introduce a considerable higher level of quality to the management of local manufacturing of medical technologies, in South Africa and all other countries in Africa themselves.
Thank you so much, team of researchers, the respondents, the people who have asked questions from the audience. Thank you very much. I need to wrap it up here. We are going to answer the questions that have not yet been answered through email, and also we're going to share the report, the full report, by the 15th of November. We're also going to share the presentation. So thank you so much to the team. Thank you, Cheryl, also for managing and organizing this platform for us to have this conversation. It has been indeed a learning for most of us, including us who have been working and talking about this for quite a while. I'm just going to wrap up and say that the African continent indeed needs strong pharmaceutical and medical device and health technologies that would enable us to achieve not only public health outcomes, but economic outcomes, industrial development, and boosting our intra-African trade in medical products. Also ensuring that we have the necessary integrated bigger markets for these products, that we also build the capability in terms of our regulatory systems, both across the medical devices, the medicines, the vaccines, the medical devices and health technologies. We are going to ensure that as we continue these conversations, that investments are made in ensuring that our intellectual property, our research and development, our human resources, the skills, the technology, the business to business linkages, the issues related with having the policy coherence across trade and industry, health, science, technology, innovation, education, that all those work together to ensure that we create the necessary incentive for our industry to grow, but also to make sure that the public health outcomes are coming through for us and that we have the health security that Africa needs. So I will wrap it up here and once again thank everybody for your participation. We look forward to continuing this conversation. We'll have smaller launches again of this report and share it as widely as possible, engaging all our member states and our various stakeholders so that we can make a dent and progress in this space. Thank you so much once again, and goodbye to all of you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.